All right. Um, I went on a tangent a long time ago, like a few months ago, trying to find out more about H.P. Lovecraft because I was doing a school project for my junior year English class and I needed to do a presentation on a writer, so I did H.P. Lovecraft. And I found out quite a lot about him. I learned his whole life history, and one of my sources was an article from the Yale Review called Lovecraft and Me. I've got my laptop here. This is not going to be high production quality video. Uh, and on one of the near the end, like actually almost at the bottom, the article covers the author's experience with Lovecraft and why they love their stories. And I probably should say the name. Give me a second. Kieran Satia. Pretty good article. I liked it. It was nice. Gave me a lot of detail. One thing I noted was that when I revisited this, it had a quote from H.P. Lovecraft saying that he had written to a fan after that fan had likened him to Edgar Allan Poe. And that fan was a teenager. Let's see. 5 months earlier, a teenage fan had likened him to Edgar Allan Poe. Lovecraft wrote back generously, as always, but in dejection. Quote, "By the standards of real literature, I simply don't exist. And that is equally true of all the routine hacks who fill the pulp magazines. We are the most negligible of small fry, and anyone who mistakes us for real authors is simply wasting his esteem." Now, that's a pretty good quote. So much so that I'm like, if I ever want to actually quote this to people, I was thinking to myself, I should know if it's actually real or not. And I tried to look it up, and this is the only copy of this quote that ever exists. It's from the Yale Reviews. The Yale Review is the only thing on the internet that specifically has this quoted. Like, you can put the quotation marks, and there's just nothing else. So then I had to dig deeper. Like, my God. So I looked into the article, and it said that it was from an article. No, sorry. It was from a letter, which means that I have to look for those, which in the time period that he wrote them in, he started off as saying, "In the early months of 1936, blah, blah, blah. By February of the following year, blah, blah, blah. 5 months later," there you go. That's when you know the time it. 5 months after February of the following year of 36. So that's, I think that was a September of 1937, or 1936. You know, one of those things. No, oh wait, 5 months earlier. This was so confusing to me when I figured, but I figured it out. I figured it out. I looked it up. I looked up September letters Lovecraft. I think I can't remember what it was. I did this a while ago, but I found that there were books that existed that contained all of Lovecraft's letters. There's books called Selected Letters, 1 through 5, and they're all written with Roman numerals to be cool. And so I needed to look specifically for Selected Letters 5, Selected Letters V. And it was pretty hard because in order to find the book, you either have to go buy a $130 copy or you just have to keep hoping that you get lucky. And it's like I was like, oh, I looked at my laptop right there. There was a little section. It just said Selected Letters 5 on the Internet Archive, archive.org. I found it. And I found a copy of Selected Letters. And it looks something unique. There's always something. So let me pull it up. Let me zoom in. Selected Letters. Where's 5 at? That's volume 3. There's 5. Look at that low resolution JPEG. That's so the brightness adjusts. Yep, there we go. It's got a picture of Lovecraft on the back with nice colored ink pen, and that changes per thing. Anyhow, that doesn't matter. I found it. September 1st, 1936. Dear Conover. Alright, should I understand? Yeah, I'll read the whole thing. I'll read the whole letter. It's take like 3 minutes. The fact is, that virtually all magazine science fiction is synthetic tripe, not worth the grown-up's time. It is simply a mess of bright ideas dragged down by infantile handling, hackneyed and lifeless plot devices and figures. Just boys' Wild West stuff given an interplanetary setting with handsome young space pilots instead of cowboys and sheriffs, and Martians and moon men instead of Indians and outlaws. And of course the usual superfluous ragdoll labeled beautiful heroine. The only serious science fiction is that outside the cheap magazines, and at the moment I can only think of three persons who produce it: H.G. Wells, S. Fowler Wright, and W. Olaf Stapledon. Has Yog-Sothoth a pedigree? No, he has always existed. Since he has no parents, I've never met them. He isn't housebroken, so I generally try to chain him outside. When he sends forth a pseudodopic... Okay. This whole section's about Yog-Sothoth, you know, it's like the one of the elder gods or whatever, I don't remember. Blah, blah, blah. I'm going to skip over this a little bit. There we go. Regarding stories. The reason my placements are so limited is that my work simply doesn't fit many existing periodicals. No, I'm under no contract, but no magazine save WT exists which prints material of the sort I write. I have no skill at all in insincere artificial writing, the sort which produces conventional pulp tripe and succeeds in the cheap magazines. When it comes to mechanical work of that grade, I have to turn to revision instead. And so far as high-grade writing is concerned, I simply don't measure up to it. 6 or 7 times book publishers have asked to see my stuff with a view to collected printings, but in each case they turn it down in the end. By the standards of real literature, I simply don't exist, and that is equally true of all the routine hacks who fill the pulp magazines. We are the most negligible of small fry, and anyone who mistakes us for real authors is simply wasting his esteem. Pulp fiction is not the product of art, but of a sort of calculative, commercial cleverness about on par with that of a skilled mechanic or small businessman. I'd rather be a good plumber or bookkeeper or post office clerk than a popular scribbler of science fiction hokum. If you want to see real artists in fantasy, look outside the magazine field, at Dunsany, Blackwood, Poe, Machen, Delamere, Bierce, and the late M.R. James, etc. And a little more about the WT and... The average WT fan... the average WT fan never even heard of the great fantastic and macabre illustrators, John Martin, Syme, Harry Clarke, Arthur Rackham, etc. He may have heard the name Doré, but probably thinks it means a kind of rowboat. Yours most sincerely, HPL. Alright, I found it. And it appears that in the original quote, that anyone who mistakes us for real authors is simply wasting his esteem, I'm not sure it's entirely deriding himself, I suppose. He's not making fun of himself, and putting himself down for the low opinion. It's more like he doesn't have a high opinion of science fiction writers, as well as he continues to write stuff that only sells in magazines and not in books. So he doesn't fit really either category of science fiction writer or book writer, real authors, like Poe. Poe would have his works collected in books of poetry, and people would read those, and that never happened in his life, in Lovecraft's life. That's about it. I mean, I found a real letter with Lovecraft, and he said the quote. So I found out at the end. Oh, it's done. Okay, I can go home now. I didn't. I kept looking into it. Who's Conover? Who's Willis Conover? Who's the teenage man, the teenage fan of H.P. Lovecraft that he was writing to? And there was a whole relationship between Willis Conover and Lovecraft. And I don't mean in a interesting way. No, it's more like he was Conover seemed like a bit of a nerd for this stuff, because he asked Lovecraft in letters how to pronounce the names of the characters, and Lovecraft would write back, and then later on he started responding at the end of his letters. Instead of HPL, it'd be like ECHPEEL, so it'd be like HPL, and something like that. So they were kind of like just a real just an underground author and their fan, which is what Lovecraft was. He died poor, and he died just a few months after this came out. This letter, sorry, but a few months after he wrote this letter, he died, less than a year. March 1937. And when he did that, there was the magazine he was a part of, Amateur Correspondent, did release one. Here's a view of it, of the cover, with an illustration of H.P. Lovecraft. Howard Phillips Lovecraft died March 15th, 1937. Called by many the dean of modern writers of weird fiction. Sorry. It's funny, they called it weird fiction back then, but Lovecraft was so good at it that it's called Lovecraftian fiction now. I mean, people don't call him good because he was the first, you know, he's got like the worst stuff because he's also the one that had to go through all the hubbub and also the other things about his life. I learned a lot when I researched him. There it is. Scrolling through. Willis Conover Jr., the guy who was writing to Lovecraft, the teenager, he wrote a poem for Lovecraft in Amateur Correspondent, the issue for May to June 1937, called The Spirits Mourn. I'll read it here. Macabre Well, that's embarrassing. Alright. Macabre ghosts join hands and dance around the grave of one departed. A lunatic, forlorn, downhearted. To searing flame his soul does prance. The spirits cease, one kneels and pants. Return, return! But he has started. To endless pain his soul has darted. The spirits mourn in silent trance. I don't actually like that poem very much, but it is about a subject I really like, and that's like that. At the end of all this, I found something that all tied together. So I got a lot out of this. And Willis Conover, he became a jazz like radio host for like 50 years, and he lived long. It was good. That was it. People moved on about it, and I finished looking into the story of the quote by H.P. Lovecraft that let me see here. Anyone who mistakes us for real authors is simply wasting his esteem. I found it. I found when he said that to a fan of his, and when that fan wrote a poem for him in the memorial issue of his death. And that was a shallow dive into deep dives.